At dawn on March 21st, 2025, 4 Chinese Coast Guard ships boxed in Japanese fishing boats inside Japan's own waters, refusing to leave for 85 hours. Beijing called it necessary control. Tokyo called it escalation. 18 chases just like this, hundreds of armed patrols, are turning a centuries-old fishing ground into a war zone. What finally pushed Japan from protest to force, and could the next interception draw blood? Just before 2 a.m. on a Friday in late March 2025, 2 Chinese Coast Guard cutters armed with deck-mounted machine guns crossed the 12-mile line around Minamikojima, a remote islet in the Senkaku chain. Their target was 2 Japanese fishing boats working waters their families have fished for generations. Within hours, 2 more Chinese vessels joined the incursion, bringing the total to 4. For more than 85 hours, Chinese ships maintained a continuous presence inside Japan's claimed territorial sea, a record for any foreign force since Japan regained control of Okinawa in 1972. At least 3 Chinese vessels remained inside the limit at any given time through Sunday evening, with 2 still on station when the clock passed the previous record. Japan Coast Guard cutters maneuvered between the Chinese ships and the fishing boats, broadcasting warnings by radio and an electronic message board, but the Chinese vessels refused to withdraw. The standoff became a test of endurance, with both sides locked in a contest of presence. In Tokyo, the government summoned China's ambassador and released a formal protest. Foreign Minister Takeshi Iwaya expressed serious concerns to his Chinese counterpart, warning that the record-breaking intrusion and pursuit of Japanese fishing boats represented a dangerous escalation. Beijing issued a statement through the China Coast Guard, insisting that its ships were conducting routine patrols in what it calls China's inherent territory. Spokesman Liu Dejun declared that the islands and their adjacent waters belong to China and urged Japan to immediately cease all infringements and provocative activities in these waters. The 2 governments offered competing narratives. Japan accused China of violating its sovereignty and harassing civilians, while China framed its actions as lawful enforcement against what it considers illegal fishing. The 85-hour standoff ended only after the last Chinese cutters withdrew. The message was unmistakable. China's Coast Guard was now willing to test limits, not just with warnings, but with sustained armed presence deep inside waters Japan claims as its own. China's presence around the Senkaku Islands is not an isolated surge. It is a pattern measured in days, numbers, and unbroken streaks. Japan Coast Guard data for 2024 reveal that Chinese government vessels operated in the contiguous zone near the islands on 355 out of 366 days, setting a new record for persistence. That year, a total of 1,351 Chinese ships were logged in the zone, a figure that dwarfs previous records and underscores the scale of operations. The statistics also show a deliberate push to normalize this presence. Between December 22nd, 2023 and July 23rd, 2024, Chinese vessels maintained an uninterrupted watch for 215 consecutive days, the longest stretch ever recorded at that point. The tempo did not slow. By October 2025, the record for consecutive days climbed again, reaching 335 days before the streak was finally broken. Territorial water intrusions tell a similar story. China Coast Guard ships crossed into Japan's 12 nautical mile territorial sea on 42 separate days in 2024, matching the previous year and representing the 2nd highest annual total since official records began. These are not random or reactive deployments. Each number and each streak points to a campaign defined by operational endurance and statistical pressure. The Japan Coast Guard's annual report describes Chinese vessels as larger, armed, and reinforced, reflecting a shift from sporadic patrols to a near constant assertion of presence. The result, the line between routine patrol and territorial challenge grows thinner with every passing day. For fishermen from Okinawa and Ishigaki, the Senkaku waters are more than a boundary on a map. They are the backbone of family life. Some captains can trace their work here back 3 or 4 generations, with fathers and grandfathers hauling lines in the same currents. Every spring, boats leave port before dawn, heading west toward the islets. The catch matters, but so does the right to work these grounds, a right now shadowed by the shape of foreign foreign steel on the horizon. The China Coast Guard cutters that appear off the bow are nothing like the patrol boats of a decade ago, where Japanese fishing boats rarely top 20 meters and carry a handful of crew. The newest China Coast Guard vessels stretch over 100 meters and displace more than 5,000 tons, twice the size of most Japan Coast Guard ships in the area. Their silhouettes are unmistakable, white hulls with blue and red stripes, topped with visible 76mm deck guns. On a calm morning, a single cutter can loom over the entire fishing fleet, its bridge bristling with sensors, loudspeakers, and water cannons. To the men in the wheelhouse, the threat is not abstract. China Coast Guard cutters now have legal authority to board and detain foreign crews for up to 60 days under China's Coast Guard law and recent regulations. The risk of being taken is real. Some fishermen have already started avoiding the richest grounds, calculating that a full hold is not worth the chance of disappearing for weeks. For those who stay, every engine rumble in the fog could be the start of a confrontation they cannot control. The Japan Coast Guard's own report now describes the Chinese presence as larger, armed, and reinforced, a warning that the balance of power at sea has tilted. What was once routine work has become a test of nerve, with livelihoods riding on each encounter. China's Coast Guard ships do not just rely on size and numbers, they patrol under a legal shield crafted in Beijing. In February 2021, the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress enacted the Coast Guard Law, granting the China Coast Guard sweeping powers in any waters China claims as its own. Article 22 is blunt. China Coast Guard officers may take necessary measures, including warning, interception, and use of force, against foreign vessels or government ships they judge to be in violation. The law does not define waters under Chinese jurisdiction, leaving the boundaries as broad as China's claims, which include the waters around the Senkaku Islands. The legal arsenal grew again in June 2024 when China Coast Guard Regulation No. 3 took effect. This rule authorizes Coast Guard commanders to detain foreign fishermen and their boats for up to 30 days, extendable to 60 days if the case is deemed complicated. No trial is required. For Japanese crews who once saw the Senkaku grounds as routine, the risk now includes weeks in detention on the mainland, far from family and legal support. The threat is no longer just a warning from a loudspeaker or a water cannon on the horizon. It is the possibility of vanishing into a legal system where China is both the lawmaker and the judge. These statutes turn each China Coast Guard cutter into an instrument of state policy. Actions that would once have been gray zone areas, boarding, seizure, even the use of force, are now backed by explicit domestic authority. Japan's defense planners see this as more than legal posturing. The 2025 Defense White Paper notes that China is strengthening coordination among the China Coast Guard, the People's Liberation Army Navy, and the Maritime Militia, with the aim of improving operational capabilities in gray zone situations. For every Japanese captain who weighs the risk of a day's work, the threat is not just the steel on the water, but the law behind it. At 9:47 a.m. on May 3, 2025, a China Coast Guard helicopter lifted off from a patrol cutter and crossed into Japanese airspace over the Senkaku Islands, staying for 15 minutes inside the 12 nautical mile limit. Within minutes, two F-15J fighters scrambled from Naha Air Base, closing in at supersonic speed. The Ministry of Defense called it an unauthorized entry and filed a formal protest. Beijing dismissed the warning, insisting the helicopter was conducting a lawful patrol in what it calls China's inherent territory. For Japanese defense officials, the breach was not just a technical violation, it was a test of Tokyo's resolve to defend its airspace over the disputed islands. The incident triggered an immediate review of air and maritime response protocols. By June, Japan's defense budget for 2025 had reached $58 billion, a record sum. 3 Sea Guardian drones began round-the-clock surveillance flights over the Senkakus, streaming live video and radar data to a new joint command center in Tokyo. Along the Ryukyu chain, convoys hauled Type 12 anti-ship missiles into position, each with a range of over 1,000 kilometers, enough to put the Chinese coast within reach. F-15s and F-35s rotated through forward bases, ready to scramble at a moment's notice. Diplomacy too shifted into confrontation. In November, Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi declared that a Chinese attack on Taiwan would trigger Japanese military action. China's consul general in Osaka responded with a warning: those who stick their heads out will have them chopped off. Beijing summoned Japan's ambassador and issued a travel advisory. Days later, on December 6, Chinese J-15 fighters locked targeting radar on Japanese F-15s near Okinawa, a move Japan called extremely dangerous. The US ambassador stood beside Tokyo, stating that America's defense commitment covers the Senkaku Islands under Article 5 of the Security Treaty. The line was drawn: any attack on the islands would bring the weight of the US-Japan alliance. The question now is not whether the next incident will come, but how far it will go. Tensions in the East China Sea now shape daily realities for both Japanese fishermen and regional security planners. As Coast Guard patrols grow bolder and militaries edge closer, any miscalculation risks igniting a crisis. The line between enforcement and escalation has never been thinner or more dangerous.